The great city of Cordoba, the capital of Islamic Spain, produced two of the most extraordinary figures of the age. Averroes, seen here in a 14th century portrait, and Maimonides, a modern sculptor to be found in Cordoba itself. Cordoba was the second city only to Baghdad. Its learning, its courts, its architecture were stunning. It was a financial center with a population of around 500,000. It was also culturally highly diverse. Christians, Jews, Muslims, living together in a remarkable, if at times uneasy, relationship. A major figure of Andalusian philosophy was Ibn Rushd, Averroes. And arguably, he marks the zenith of Arab Islamic philosophy. He played an extraordinary role in the transmission of Aristotelian scholarship into the West, when Greek philosophy and Aristotle, above all, were unknown, except for Aristotle's logical works, and of Plato only his Timaeus. When Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle were translated into Latin in the 13th century, they laid the foundation of the scholastic tradition in medieval Europe, as we shall talk about later. That tradition would have been impossible without Averroes. And what of his life? Ibn Rushd was born in Cordoba in 1126 and died in Marrakesh in 1198. He belonged to that rich culture of Andalusia. Nevertheless, his defense of Aristotle was deeply controversial in Islamic intellectual culture, because Averroes defended that God acts through natural laws. He famously held his reading of Aristotle's philosophy in a work entitled The Incoherence of the Incoherence. The breadth of his writing is astonishing, and over 80 works have survived, the majority of which are on philosophy, but also medicine, law, theology, and grammar. To these, of course, we can add the commentaries on Aristotle and Plato. But if that wasn't enough, Averroes also took a role in judicial work and the law, and served as a religious judge in Seville and Cordoba. In addition, on account of his medical studies, which were extensive, he became a court physician. Ibn Rushd's work on Aristotle spanned almost 30 years, and he wrote commentaries on almost all of Aristotle's works except the Politics, which he did not have access to. Hebrew translations of his work also had a lasting influence on Jewish philosophy, and Moses Maimonides and other Jewish philosophers read his work with deep respect. Famous scholastics later, such as Aquinas, did not refer to him by name, Averroes, but called him the commentator, as they called Aristotle, the philosopher. Moshe ben Maimon, known in English as Maimonides, also had a profound effect in the Jewish world in the Mediterranean. He was born in Cordoba, likewise, in Andalusia, in 1138. He knew displacement from an early age when he was a refugee from the Almohad, a Berber Muslim movement that endangered Jewish Arabic culture in Andalusia. Like Averroes, Maimonides was a brilliant student, devoting himself to the reading of the Greek philosophers in Arabic, as well as of science and other branches of learning. He studied the Torah under his father, who had himself learned from a distinguished line of rabbis. The Almohads conquered Cordoba in 1148 and abolished the protected status of Jews and Christian communities. Conversion to Islam under this radical group was demanded on punishment of death. Many Jews did convert, but were forced to wear identifying markers on account of suspicion that those conversions were not real. However, as mentioned, Maimonides' family chose exile, and for 10 years wandered around southern Spain before he arrived in Morocco. It was at this time he wrote his commentary on the Mishnah, which he began in 1066. Then his family traveled to the Holy Land and to Egypt. Maimonides himself played an important role in the ransoming of Jewish captives from the Crusaders. Around 1171, he became the leader, the Nagid, of a Jewish community in Egypt. He had already studied medicine in Spain and became famous as a physician to the royal family in Egypt. He continued to study Greek and Arabic medicine, and his own writings in the field became well known. He died in Fustat, the great Muslim city in Egypt, in 1204. It's difficult in a few words to gain a sense of this man who came from the great age of Jewish culture in Andalusia and then traveled the Mediterranean world. What Maimonides set out to do was to create a unified legal code from a wider variety of disparate sources. His Mishnah Torah created an unambiguous text of halakhic writing, Jewish law. Maimonides' work was unprecedented in the comprehensive text that he authored, and its influence in the Jewish world was enormous. The extent of Maimonides' thought ranged across a whole series of disciplines. In terms of biblical interpretation, he argued against all idolatrous representations of the divine. He reshaped Jewish religious language, and through his emphasis on God's wisdom as revealed in nature, Maimonides reinterpreted basic concepts such as providence, creation, prophecy, and revelation. Maimonides saw philosophy and science as the means to the highest religious experience. He was deeply influential, as we've said, in the study of Aristotle and his Muslim commentators. And he greatly respected the work of Averroes. He sought to reconcile the tradition with Jewish traditions. And this integration found expression in his Mishnah Torah, making his voice of lasting importance and influence. In the fields of law and philosophy, Maimonides transformed Jewish culture, so much so that he's often compared with the figure of Moses himself. Maimonides' most famous work was known as a guide for the perplexed, and here we see a 14th century manuscript. The Guide for Perplexed was written originally in 1190 in Judeo-Arabic, but it was then translated into Hebrew in 1204. The guide, along with the legal writings, was to be profoundly influential in Christian scholastic tradition. And Maimonides brought, along with Averroes, the Aristotelian corpus into the West. He was read by the great figures of Albert the Great, Thomas Aquinas, and Duns Scotus. Averroes and Maimonides, towering figures that represent a wider culture of learning, of faithfulness to religion, and of expansive exploration of subjects that marked the world of medieval Spain.